Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the Kiali Sprint 67 community meeting. So at the end of this sprint, we are going to release the Kiali version 1.45. This is the fifth release for the year 2022. So this is our agenda for today. So we are going to just to comment a quick summary of Sprint 67. And also we will show one of the highlights of the version 1.45. Couple of things. So this Sprint 67 was one time longer than usual, was 6 weeks because it was the break, the holidays break, and we decided to put 6 weeks just to accommodate all the vacations and so on. And another comment is that this release, the Kiali 1.45 version, will be shipped in the next major Istio version. So Istio 1.13 will ship Kiali 1.45. No problems. That is the expectation, the plan. So yeah, this is Spain 67. So the summary would be that we have a lot of activity in bug fixes, also a lot of work in performance improvements, especially in the backend, also some improvement in the front end. We are going to show also a lot of work in the UI usability. So you're going to see change in how we visualize, especially in large scenario, and more features are planning for to be worked in the following streams. Also, a lot of hardening in the CI, in the pipelines, in the way to work out in the in the linters, also in this kind of all the work that we are trying to make the project more robust. And also as well a couple of new features that we are going to showcase today, right? So the new features I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to the mic to Jay, going to show us the new features about the graph usability and let's go. So Jay, so you
Yep.
can also see the
Thanks,
screen.
Lucas. Let me share my screen. And I'm assuming you guys can see that. Let me know if there's a problem. So one of the
Yes.
things that we're really looking at going forward are larger meshes, scale and usability at scale. So it's not just all performance, but some of it is we're starting to look at, what can we do better in the actual usability when you're dealing with a lot of services or a lot of namespaces and so forth. And we're just starting to kind of really focus in that area. So one thing we looked at was what were some of the things that we could do relatively quickly in the graph, which is, one of the screens that people find themselves either starting on or landing on frequently. And you use that usually to figure out what's happening overall, and then to maybe drill down into details of interest. So I thought there's a variety of changes that we made. So I wanted to kind of show you the existing graph and then sort of the changes that have been made in 1.45. So if I was to start with 1.44, and I'm going to choose these three namespaces to look at, this would be my default graph in this particular case. So a few things to point out. One, this is a versioned app graph, which is the default. Pretty much all the defaults in place right now. You can see that we're not namespace boxed, meaning we don't really know what we're looking at very easily. So we have three namespaces here, but I don't know what's what, because what we have is we're already zoomed out pretty far so that the graph can fit in the space that we have. We can see down here that the legend button is already occluding part of the graph, so I can't really see it. Some of the nodes or labels under there. And more than that, you can see all the labels in the graph all over the place, but you can't read them because the text is too small So they're not really serving much purpose, and they're making the graph more busy to look at. Also, you can see as I kind of move around the graph, we have a very aggressive mouse over sort of approach right now, or in the past, where you get a lot of this flashing effect, which it's nice in theory because we're trying to show you when you're hovering over something kind of what's active, and we dim the rest of the graph. So we're kind of trying to focus on the thing that you're hovered over. But as you move around, you get this sort of really annoying flashing that's been going on for quite some time. So there's a few things right off the bat that are different. If I look at the exact same graph in 1.45 by default, it looks like this. So some things right off the bat. You can see that we've shrunk down and moved the on-screen on-graph toolbar to the bottom left, and we've made it vertical to kind of move it out of the way. And in that way, it ends up occluding the graph much less frequently. And even if it does, it's smaller. And you can see the legend button has been changed to just another icon, so it just kind of fits in nicely. But the legend itself hasn't really changed very much. But you'll see that it's actually a little bit smaller and a little bit more consistent in its look and feel, font-wise, and so forth. That's minor, but the positioning of the toolbar is, I think, nicer. You'll also see that by default now we do what we call boxing, right? So you have namespace boxing. If I look at the display options, you'll see that namespace boxes and cluster boxes are enabled by default. And this is just because we found that most people were, in fact, immediately turning them on anyway. So you'd get your graph that we had, for instance, over here, and then people would tend to just turn it on because it does give you more organization to your graph. So we figured, let's do that, but at the same time, we also eliminated some unnecessary boxing that we were doing, which was just sort of visually tiring. So you won't see boxing if you've got just one node inside of what would have been the box, and then we'll just show you the node like what you see over here. So basically, when the box doesn't really help, we've eliminated it. It's just a little bit of pruning there for visual clarity. The other thing you'll notice, probably more striking, is that there's no labeling here. Because if at a certain zoom level, if you've zoomed out enough, the labels are unreadable. So we just wipe them out. And what that means is when you do get to a readable level, they will show up, for example. But we'll see that in a second. What I wanted to kind of point out next was, well, how do we really use the graph? And typically, the graph is going to help you visually locate areas of interest. And so when I look at this particular graph, I'm going to be probably looking for anything that's unhealthy, which is yellow for degraded or red for where I've got a higher level of failures. And I wanted to also show you that there's different ways in the graph to do certain things to locate that. If you can't necessarily see those colors because your graph is zoomed out really far, you can always use something like a quick graph find, and I can just type in, show me or highlight things that are healthy. If I type that, you can see that. But maybe more interesting is if I just say not healthy, and then, I can see down here, there's actually a node that's not healthy. And I can quickly move my cursor to it. And you might have noticed that as I quickly moved my cursor to it, I didn't get any of that flashing that we saw. So we've changed that mouse over behavior to be less aggressive. And what we really want to do is encourage people to be able to get to what they want to focus on immediately without that flashing, and encourage people to do hovering and selection and context menu clicking type things. So obviously you can see quickly now that when I hover over this unhealthy node, I'm getting a pop-up to give me the context info of what that node is in a font that I can actually read because I'm zoomed, right? So you can see that, it's an application, it's in the travel agency namespace, and it's the travels application that seems to be giving me a problem. And we can then sort of try to investigate that in different ways. Just a little bit more on the hover, you can quickly identify namespaces by hovering over the boxes and so forth. So now I know that I'm really interested in the travel agency namespace. That seems to be the only place. So if I wanted to, I could focus in on that one in particular. There's, again, a lot of different ways I can zoom in to get to what I want to look at. At this level, you can see that I still don't have labels because there's still the graph is still dense enough. But what's showing up actually are the badging that we do. So we can see at this zoom level, at least the badges, because they're a little bit easier to see than labels. And I can also see that I've got a problem on this edge, and I can hover over the edge as well, and I see, okay, there's a problem going from travels to flights. Some requests to the flight service are just failing completely. I see over here that I've got a badge for fault injection and routing on this service, and sure enough, it's actually the flight service, which is going to pretty much immediately indicate to me that the reason I've got these issues here is most likely due to fault injection. And there's a lot of ways I can figure that out. If I look at the flags on all these requests, I can see the returning 503, and sure enough, it's fault injection that's causing the problem, which is anticipated because you can see that I have gone through the process of putting that rule in there to cause that problem. And of course, there's all the things that we can usually do. You might want to see how many requests or what percentage of requests are causing that problem. I want it to zoom in a little bit, and all of a sudden you can see that I can now read my edge information. All of a sudden the labels show up and so forth. So as you zoom in and zoom out, you get that change. Another way you can do it is to immediately just drag and zoom on the area. And this is something that's not new, but you'll see that when I do that, all of a sudden I've got the labeling that I expect. A couple of other minor changes. I should mention that the font that you set. So I said, when the font becomes too small, we get rid of it. That's configurable so that for your particular installation, you could always change both the zoom levels, the minimum fonts where those things disappear, or up here, the default font that you want to have for your labels in the graph. That's all configurable for your install. And the last thing was just a fix that I wanted to mention, where you could have problems in the past with fast clicking. So if I was to say, turn off this option, I used to be able to click it multiple times in a row, maybe by mistake or maybe on purpose because I changed my mind. And that could cause crashing. We've at least protected against that now. You'll see all the options gray out while the graph refreshes. I think that's the summary for a variety of graph changes, and hopefully people will find that useful. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay, for the summary. Let me to share again my screen. So yeah, a lot of usability improvements. Probably, I guess that more use cases when you drill down to the detail, you will see more active all these chains. And yeah, please, the community, give a feedback about all these chains, right? Another of the features that we are working on in the same of the ethics is to make Kiali more useful the way to create configuration from Istio. So one of the features that we already have is at namespace level. You see all this traffic is to the possibility to create security Istio configuration just to block the traffic to the system graph that you see. So that was an action that was under, in the overview page. You click into the menu and you see a create traffic policies. So this action is going it creates for you all the authorization policies. Authorization policies are the objects that let you to define which sources are going to access to your workload, but also the sidecars, which or the destination your workload can access. So what we introduce in this time is a preview mode, just to not only to generate this artifacts for you, but also to preview. Before that, we are going that let Kiali to create a configuration is to show to the user, okay, so we are going to create all of these authorization policies objects that I can modify in the editor and all of these sidecars. In the case that I don't want to create it, because perhaps I'm a user that I don't have the rights to create in this cluster, I can copy this configuration to my clipboard, or I can just download it like a YAML file ready to use it in a different environment. So this feature is ready. So the idea is to progress in this feature in the other wizards that we have to add more value to Kiali in the scenario to manage Istio configuration. Okay, so another aspect that we work pretty hard this sprint is about the performance, right? So during the performance, we tried also in this sprint just to better use information about the Istio registry, especially for all the validation aspects. So you know that Kiali allows you to validate your Istio configuration. Typically, the Istio configurations let me to add a lot of hosts, a lot of sources, a lot of connections. So this virtual services is connected with this other destination rule. But if I don't check the destination rule exists, the host of the virtual services of this authorization process is valid, probably I may have some problems in my graph, as Jay showed in the previous demo. So there may be something in red. And I don't know if this is something expected, the workload is failing, or just the Istio configuration is not right. So it's something, some problem. So this is one of the use cases of Kiali to help you to troubleshoot your mess, right? So also this has a cost because it's quite CPU intense, because we need to fetch a lot of configuration, and typically when you have a large cluster with a lot of destination rules, typically you have a common impact. So we are working on that direction to make it more efficiently and to better support large cluster, large population, both on services and both on a lot of Istio configuration. And we are applying these techniques in several features, like the validation. Also, when we validate and we fetch all the collection of services and service entry that are used in my mess. Also, specifically, one very intense feature is the cross namespace validation. When I have some services that are pointing a different namespace and I have a mix of Istio configuration pointing in both namespaces, that is pretty intense. So it's something that is now to highly improve it. Also, the TLS validation to check if the mutual TLS is effectively working as the user has defined, right? And also to try to warn as quickly as possible that there is some problem or some failure in the security area. We are keeping working on this direction, right? So we are introducing a lot of improvements. More are planned to work in the following sprints, but it's something that you will see also in the Kiali 1.45. More fixes that you will see in these versions. You know, just to summarize some of them, because we have a lot of work in the bug fixes and hardening. It's, you know, some fixes about the crash when we have some situation, we have some scenario, corner case that I may have a workload without services, and in this case have some crash in the console that is already fixed. Also fixes in the operator reconciliation when I start managing namespaces. You know that when you add more namespaces, the operator triggers to propagate this information to the Kiali. So when all these fixes are being addressed in this version. Also was to mention that we have a lot of activity from the community. So thank you to the users, to Max Bischoff, so we could improve the Go Max procs to make it more efficient to use the Kiali backend. depending on the number of processors that you have in your system. So thank you a lot, Max, for this improvement. Also to send some performance improvements in the validation code in the regex. Be good. Also, thank you to Sunso to several fixes around the Swagger to hardening the project, to hardening the documentation, and also for these minor code fixes about improvements in the static variables, etc. So thank you a lot because the community is quite active and it's good to see that that we have a lot of users that are proposing ideas. So yeah, I think we are as a team we are very happy to have. I'm very sensitive to receive any feedback from the end to okay what could be next. And yeah, and I guess this is what we have for this sprint. Remember, this version, the Kiali 1.45, will be shipped with the Istio 1.13. And please let us know any feedback, any problem that you may see using the GitHub discussion or issues. I will be more than happy to read you and just to work with you. I'm going to stop the recording.